Hello everyone, welcome back to Red Japanese Sounds. And in today's video I would really like to take a brief moment to talk about the current market for the Japanese vinyl records, because there is a lot to talk about. But I would really also like to talk about the current environment in terms of collectibles, and not limited to Japanese records of course. But it's very important now more than ever to understand why those items are going up. We all know that they are collectible because we have some interest in them, but why exactly are they popping up in terms of price so much recently? And to that, I think we need to dive at least just a bit into the current environment, the world's economy, and just society in general, to understand really what's going on and why people are going crazy over pieces of plastic and cardboard. And you could say the same for most collectibles. But what really prompted this video was specifically me looking at Tatsuro Yamashita's auctions over the last months, and I was really surprised to see how strong everything by Tatsuro Yamashita has been going. Of course, he has always been a very popular artist, we all know that, especially in Japan, and he wasn't really well known abroad until the last few years, when some specific albums like For You have started to become very popular, and he has become sort of a synonym for city pop. But now we realize that his fame has driven the price of all of his albums, especially the older ones, so much that it's worth taking the time to talk about what exactly is happening. So if you take his normal albums, you know, his standard studio albums, so we first have Circus Town, Spacey, Go Ahead, It's a Pop in Time, although It's a Pop in Time is live, sorry. Then you have Right on Time, Moonglow, For You, and etc. You see where I'm going at. So those albums now are all going for about, let's say, $20 to $25. And the cheapest among those is Melodies, because it was the best-selling record back in the day, so it's normal that the price is lower. But if we take the better known albums, like For You specifically, the price is still going up above 5,000 yen, and it easily sells for more if you're aiming at an international audience, like on Discogs or anyone that ships abroad. You see that the price is easily going towards the 10,000 yen range or the $100. And it's crazy to see that kind of price for an album that was owned by ordinary people back in the day. And that's my segue that I'm trying to get at, is that we see some sort of shift from what was the city pop audience, I mean people who bought city pop records maybe 3 years ago and right now. And we actually didn't, it's very hard to notice when you're inside the hobby like we are, because 3 years ago it was a bit, everything was mixed together. People were listening to Tatsuro Yamashita and then, you know, moving on directly to Hiroshi Yoshimura. The audience was a bit the same for everything. At least it was the case for me and people I talked about. People were in a very fluid way moving, thanks to YouTube algorithm, from, you know, Ryo Fukui's Scenery album to For You to Green by Hiroshi Yoshimura. All those albums that had nothing in common back in the day suddenly became bound together by the YouTube algorithm and had a singular audience that started to enjoy them for what they were, for their pure musical quality and the fact that they were considered rare from a Western audience standpoint. Of course, the actual rarity of For You and Green isn't like, it's not in the same ballpark. But the interesting point is that there was a central audience that spread around to all those genres, and that's what people sometimes call the YouTube core, in terms of just describing music that is not defined by its genre of music, but more by the way it propagated in terms of popularity. But today I think that things are a bit more separated than they used to be. Now you have a much more focused base of city pop fans who really care about Tatsuro Yamashita, Maria Takeuchi, and, you know, the big city pop artists, especially those who had some fame back in the day. But of course you also have Takako Mamiya, who wasn't well known at all. But you still have that core of very well-known artists, and people are starting to develop some kind of fandom towards them. And really, we start to move towards a type of collectability where it's more the artists that people care about, as opposed to simply one particular album, like it was the case maybe 3 to 5 years ago. And in the case of Tatsuro Imashita, this can be seen very well. Well, first because Tatsuro Imashita has an audience in Japan. Maybe it's a bit more towards the older side in terms of the age range. But now, with that younger audience from abroad pumping out money basically to buy his records and his CDs, his cassettes, we can really see that from specific items by Tatsuro Imashita. For instance, the Joy album, the live album on 3LP, more specifically, this one is popping up to more than 100,000 yen, maybe even the 150,000 range. And that can only be explained by the fact that it's one of his albums with the shortest supply, and the fact that you have the combined push that has always existed in some way from his national audience in Japan. But in 2015, the album was pretty much worth maybe 50,000 yen, so $500, maybe less. But from the push from abroad and the general acceptation now that it's okay to buy expensive records, at least more than before. Before it would be only reserved to very, very audiophile people, specifically people who listen to jazz, but now it has really extended to the more general audience. And that's how you get to albums that goes as expensive as $1,000 or more, at least in the case of Joy. But this is one of his most well-known albums and one of his masterpieces, according to many people who are fan of Tatsuro Imashita. But beyond that, you start to see price increase a lot for very niche item in the Tatsuro Imashita fandom. For instance, cassette tapes of his albums before Ride on Time, back when his albums were maybe in the top 100 best-selling albums instead of the top 5. And that didn't really exist before. I mean, not in such a way where, for instance, a cassette tape of It's a Pop in Time, it's hard to pronounce, got sold for something like $750 this month, in August. It really makes you think that now people are not as much interested in the individual albums and more interested in the general Tatsuro person, everything around the artist. And that's why you start getting some memorabilia that start getting higher and higher. And I think that will be the trend for the years to follow, people being really fans of Tatsuro Imashita, and we break away from the phenomenon where simply Just For You was the defining album for the city pop genre. So that's one category of people that I think will definitely exist more so than now in the future. Another category of people is those who are really into the rare sounds, and maybe that's what I could call myself. The title of my channel is Rare Japanese Sounds, but beyond that, I'm more interested in getting the rare albums, the albums that I find very unique, rare, difficult to collect. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the challenge of finding something to collect that is hard to find and that not everyone can get if they want to. And that is, even if they are reissued or not, I don't really care. I mostly want the challenge of collecting the original one. I don't really care about the album itself. If I only care about the album, I would just try to find an MP3 and of the best quality and listen to it. But I really want the medium of what it was originally released on. That's really the idea behind my way of collecting, and I think many other people, if we can judge by the prices of the albums I collect. So this audience is probably going to develop more and more, and as much as I hate to say it, I think in the following years we will see again some kind of shift between the rare album kind of thing, but I think we're going to see an emergence of more of the art behind some of the rare Japanese music, and I'm referring more specifically to Japanese ambient music. I think it's going to leave the rare sound, rare albums area and start getting into the actual art field. When people realize the uniqueness of the type of music that existed, for instance, all the works by Hiroshi Yoshimura, how leading it was, what it created and what its influence is, even in today's Japan. The fact that you can hear short jingles by Hiroshi Yoshimura when you go to some train stations in Tokyo, you still have pieces of that influence that are in very inconspicuous places, places that you wouldn't expect to find that kind of influence in, but it exists and we don't notice it. And I think this particular style of making music with the goal of not being noticed is actually going to propel him into the world of art. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw major exhibitions dedicated to Hiroshi Yoshimura in maybe 10 years. All that to say that we are going to see a shift from just this core people just caring about music and nice albums to very specific evolutions of each area. And I don't think that in the future we will have there won't be the same connection between, let's say, For You by Tatsuro Yamashita and Green by Hiroshi Yoshimura as there was in 2015. I hope that you see where I'm getting at, but my point is that today the way that people consume Japanese music, at least from abroad, is through a certain framework. That framework used to be YouTube, but as people got more and more intimate with the different genres that exist of Japanese music and started to get an interest in that music independently from listening to it on YouTube and forming Discord communities, subreddits, forums, people exchanging more and more about that, we'll see people moving on from the whole YouTube platform. And that's when we will see diverging audiences, first towards the city pop icons like Tatsuro Yamashita, Maria Takeuchi. We'll see real fandoms and prices evolve in that direction, with memorabilia, the rarer, the more expensive. And that's probably what we're going to see. In another direction, we will see people who are moving on to what they call the Walearic music, which is a play on the character wa, which means Japanese, and Balearic to call the genre of music. So we'll see people getting more and more seriously into that genre of music, collecting certain labels. For instance, what I do with the Misawa Home label or the Shizen label. We'll see more and more people doing that in a way that I think doesn't exist as much in today's collectible world for music. Not many people are interested in collecting certain labels, but I think it will exist, at least it already exists in my world, but I think more people are going to become interested in it. And in another way, we will see, for the real unique part of Japanese music, we might see it going towards the world of art, and it will really change the way that people see those albums. And I think in the case of Hiroshi Yoshimura in particular, we'll see some of his more unique creations, for instance, his drawings that only exist in one copy because he made them individually, maybe his early compositions, his early poems and all that, and some of his rarer musical works. I think those will become crazy expensive. But of course, that needs time, and it needs the right combination of luck, popularity in terms of what people are interested in. Of course, those things move back and forth. It happens all the time with all kinds of hobbies, like comic books, baseball cards. It's always a cycle. And right now we are at what is still, in my honest opinion, the beginning of a real cycle for Japanese music and perhaps records in general. Why be so limited to Japanese music? Why not have a resurgence of just collecting records in general and appreciate them for what they are, which is an extremely new way of sharing something with people. I have to remind that music didn't used to be placed on a physical medium until the 1900s, and it wasn't really made in a very popular way until the 1950s and the microgroove improvements and the birth of the LPs. So we have only had real ways to collect music and to do it in a significant way for maybe like 50 years tops. So you realize that because there is no history behind that, you don't have the thousands of years of history that you have with books, for instance. Because this is so young, but yet so important, because music is one of the, it's one of the most fundamental arts that we can imagine. And because music is so important, can be understood by everyone from every background, and has such an importance in everyone's life and also as a form of art, I think the prices that we see today are not really logical compared to like how much it matters. And in today's society, I think because we have most of what we do is made digital, has been made digital from years and years of automation and replacing the way that we work in ways that make everything we interact with digital. it's pretty normal for people to start feeling more attached to physical objects. And I think that's the trend of collectibles today. People want to create their own history by collecting something that they shouldn't really have had. And it's something that I really identify with in the case of Japanese records. You know, I only came to Japan a few years ago, and I mean, if I weren't collecting Japanese music, I would never have gotten my hands on many of my records. And this idea behind creating our own history, being our own some sort of bookkeepers of certain artifacts of the past, it's really something that connects with people more and more as we move to a purely digital society. And I would be extremely surprised if, you know, if people didn't realize at some point that music is one of the most beautiful things we have in life, and that should be reflected in the price of records, especially the rarest ones and ones that have a lot of meaning in terms of music as an art and as a form of expression. Anyway, this was Rare Japanese Sound with a very, very random discussion. I hope that you will still enjoy it, and I might make a more dedicated video to the market of vinyls, but this video dedicated to just the prices evolution don't usually have a lot of views, so that's why I'm trying to mix it with a bit of an interesting discussion on what exactly drives demand, popularity, and why exactly we are collecting in general. But as we wrap up this video, I would just like to remind everyone, including myself, that as we said, music is just a form of expression, and we don't need vinyl records or CDs to enjoy it. Especially as music is available now everywhere and so easily, there is really no need to just chase the physical medium. It's something that we do for the pleasure of art, the pleasure of collecting, but it's really something that's not one of the most important parts of life. Anyway, this was Rare Japanese Sounds. Hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, stay tuned.